Thank you for that introduction. This is not my swag bag. This will be for props later. Oftentimes, I get invited to speak, to talk primarily about issues of domestic violence or some form of abuse. And so this is kind of a rare opportunity for me to actually be able to talk about the ideas that went into forming or shaping this particular narrative for Family Fare, and also how it's informed me about how I want to continue some of those ideas into the current project that I'm working on, and also some future ideas that I have. So before I talk about that, actually I want Allie Duffy and Kathy Plazek, I want to thank you wherever you are out there, and all the people who are working behind the scenes to pull off this event. Thank you. When I was thinking about this, what kind of films am I interested in? I think, as it turns out, I'm interested in telling stories, making films that I cannot not make. Right? So, no offense, thank you for the offer, but the climate change film may not be the next film that I make. Although it does seem like there are, it does seem like maybe there are some connections around issues that people don't want to talk about. And I am very interested in telling stories, addressing issues that people don't oftentimes want to talk about. Taboos, things that are banned, things that are not supposed to happen, but in fact do. And oftentimes, these acts are sort of carried out by people that we know, people that we trust or are supposed to trust. And so, to that extent, family members, friends, colleagues are oftentimes implicated. Those are the kinds of stories that I think that I'm interested in telling, because, as Tom had mentioned, this was not a story that I wanted to tell, right? I did not want to make this film. I did not set out to make Family Affair. In fact, I'd spent my entire life really trying to distance myself from this terrible part of my past. So I traveled to Thailand. I got an education here and at BC. I moved to Boston all the way from Cincinnati in Kentucky. And yet everywhere I went, there I was faced with this issue. And even I separated and cut off all ties with my father for more than 15 years. Until in 2001, I was down in Kentucky at my sister's house for Thanksgiving, and to my surprise, my father walks in the door. Now, I'd always sort of imagined this moment, right? This would be my moment. I'm now an adult, and I would confront him, I would condemn him, I would indict him for what he had done to my sisters and our family. But as it turned out, I found myself sort of hiding behind this little camcorder that I had with me. I found myself only able to really look at him through the lens finder, and I found myself viewing him through the prism of a terrified little boy's eyes. And I returned to Boston with my tail between my legs. I felt like a failure. I felt like a coward. And I thought, this is my lot in life. I've figured it out. I am a coward. And that was a terrible thing to have to consider, that I would have to live with that. And it frightened me. And as I was sort of, sitting with that idea, I began to think, maybe there's a story here. I began to hear this inner voice telling me, you have to tell this story. I was like, no, I don't. I don't want to do this. You have to. And so I started to become really interested in not so much what was happening, but what wasn't happening. I became very interested in what we weren't talking about. I became very interested in why wasn't I confronting my father? Why was I afraid to confront him? Why were my sisters accommodating this man? Why were so many people accommodating this man who had done these terrible, monstrous things to them? And so I started to make a film. Some of the ideas that came to me around how I wanted to shape this film, first and foremost, I wanted it to be accessible. I wanted it to be accessible and to resonate with people who might not directly or indirectly have experienced the kind of trauma that my sisters and I did growing up. Secondly, I didn't want this to turn into an indictment piece, a vendetta. Third, I didn't want this to turn into cinematic therapy at the expense of you, the audience, right? I didn't want it to be didactic, educational, kind of self-help film. And most importantly, I didn't want to reduce my sisters to the worst thing that had ever happened to them. So, those are the don'ts. How did I navigate those obstacles and stay within the parameters that I had set for myself? And also for the other people, you know, the army of credits, all those people that come on board to help you shape the film. You have to create these parameters. So one of the main ideas for me was I wanted to make sure that the abuse, the trauma, was used or merely served as a narrative backdrop upon which these larger kind of universal themes could rest upon. So themes like loyalty, forgiveness, redemption, longing for family. Secondly, in order to make these taboo sort of issues accessible, I found myself spending a lot of time not actually studying documentaries, but really looking at dramatic narratives, looking at how can I adopt some of the devices from dramatic narratives to move this story forward, to make it accessible. So there, I was looking at pacing. I was looking at the use of musical composition. I was looking at humor. I was looking at how to create tensions. I was looking at when do you crescendo a certain moment? When do you create reveals? How do you create this and turn this into a suspenseful, or as Wesley Morris said at the Boston Globe, a psychological thriller? How can I do that? So I was very interested in, you know, like Hitchcock, you know, the shower scene, right? You know, right? We all know the scene. What's so powerful to me there is what we don't see. So to me, that was sort of the use of intentional sort of ambiguity, deliberate ambiguity. And I would write on the board for my editors and folks that would come in and work with me, the audience must work. The audience must work. There's a real tendency in this business to want to clarify, right? To cloak your film in a veil of expertise so that the audience gets it. I increasingly began to sort of bank on the idea that I think the audience is going to get this. If for no other reason, the very sort of dismal statistics that exist out there that tell us that 1 in 3 women will be or have been sexually assaulted by the time that they're 18 by somebody that they know. So I didn't need to do that. And so I didn't need to unpack those statistics. I didn't need to unpack the history of domestic violence. And this is my timeline, by the way. And eat up the timeline. So I could save it. I could use it for addressing other issues. Why don't we look at the trailer? I'm a Mac person. I hope I get this right. Let's pause it. So here's a 2-minute trailer for Family Affair.
There's nothing about that day that was real. I do distinctly remember pulling the rifle up and pointing it at her head and thinking, a rifleman wouldn't do that.
I don't know what kind of person I would have been had I not gotten shot. And as I get older, and as I've gone through things in life, I realize it was a blessing. But first it was Angie, then it was Paula, then it was me, then it was all 3 of his girls.
The police surrounded the house, they knocked on the door. Of course, Daddy acted like he didn't know what was happening, because he was shot.
They had to broke it down to rednecks, Klansmen, Muslim, the double Muslim. And if you was weak, they would charge you. And for what I was in there, they'd not charge you anyway.
When we all got separated, we lost our lifelines. As dysfunctional as it was, we needed each other.
I don't feel like there's anything that she can say that would explain why she left.
What do you say after, what, how many years?
18.
18.
Just so much anger, man, so much anger. I don't know where I get it from. Everybody wants a loving mother and a loving father. As deranged as it may sound, it took years for us to get like that with Daddy. You're just coming in at the end. But you all have no idea what was going on in that house. You have no idea.
Okay, I have to, hopefully I can get back to where we were. Oh no. Oh. I want to show you actually a few clips from the film that I'm working on now. Here we go. Which I've never shown to anybody before. Well, there are like 3 people. But I want to make the connection between some of the ideas that were employed with Family Affair, some of the kind of narrative devices that were used there, and talk about how that's going to be used in the film that I'm working on now. The working title of it right now, it's sort of like your temp music, you know. You call it temp music. And then after 7 or 8 years, it's like you can't imagine using any other music. And I think that's what's happening with my working title. The working title of this project I'm working on now is called Black Memorabilia. And I'm sort of envisioning it as a love story or a portrait about people who consume, manufacture, and in some cases, and this really surprised me, actually assume the identities of these objects in an attempt to try to combat what these objects perpetuate. Does that make sense? So let's take a look at that. I want a disclaimer, though. There are 6 minutes of footage here. They're broken up into 3 separate scenes. And it's really just me. It's sort of experimental. So I'm just experimenting with some ideas for how I might want to approach the next film, this film. And the first one is an example probably of the extreme of the kind of film that I'm not going to make, because it's very suggestive in ways that I'm not trying to set out to be, and you'll see why. The second one is probably more in keeping with the direction in which that I want to go with this next film.
stop in New York. Check here around you for your first belongings while you should have
I know who these two girls are. They're the same character. This is Marjorie. She's a young girl that I've been, I guess, drawing with a pillowcase over her head. See, this is my secret, I guess my secret body of work that no one has seen before. So, it's just Marjorie playing in the playground. Kids I thought were going to be creeped out actually loved it. I like when Marjorie is, you know, in the company of other people, but they seem to ignore me. I think what's painful is when I take this stuff off. It's actually not as painful as putting it on. It's like you're trying to erase your skin. It's the first time I did this, it really disturbed me. It's really intense. It just wouldn't come off.
Okay, I'll stop it there. The next scene that was coming up is actually this woman, Joy, this white woman, Joy, and that's important here, the notion of racism, because I met her in Maryland at a Black Memorabilia collectible get-together thing, and here are all these people selling, you know, like Black Memorabilia baseball cards and Black Power movement, and in the sea of all this blackness, there's Joy with her KKK booth. And I thought, you know, you go down to these things and you're driving and you're by yourself and, you know, you're filming nothing, you know, the road, and you're like, stop at McDonald's. And you think, I've got no film here, and you're full of doubt. And then you meet Joy, and you think, that's why I came down here. Let me conclude by showing you this and making this point. So, here we have the Aunt Jemima cookie jar and the Jolly Nigger Bank. right? Similar ideas used in family affairs. So the piece about not going into this with an agenda to indict. If you do that, you, to me, are in the process of getting ready to create a very limited film. So, like with my sisters, for a long time I had been judgmental, but in order to make the film, as I was in the process of making the film, I had to let that go. It became much more complex and nuanced than simply saying, my sisters are delusional for having a relationship, maintaining a relationship with my dad. In the same way, there are any number of reasons why people might have these objects in their possession. So I'm not saying, if you have black memorabilia, you are a racist. You may be, like me, up here on a stage or in the classroom using these as a teaching tool. You may simply have these as to create a revenue stream. Yes, there are people who collect these because it conjures up some nostalgia for, the good old days. But here are the people that I'm most interested in. Imagine, and this is what allows me to drop the judgmental piece, the indictment piece. Imagine, if you would, you are a little girl, little boy. I see you, Tom. Stay. And someone you love, again, the usual suspects, a mother, a father, a grandparent, someone we trust, brings you this cookie jar and says, do you want a cookie? Because these objects also have a real utility to it. This is also very important. You want a cookie? Of course you do. You're going to have a positive association with this jar that some may argue in and of itself is harmful and derogatory and perpetuates stereotypes, racist stereotypes about blacks. Same is true with this, right? Someone gives you this, gives you money to go into it and help you sort of earn your savings. So to go up to that person and indict them or ask them to condemn these objects is asking them to condemn and indict that experience and the people that introduced these objects to them. That's the area for me that becomes very interesting. Those are the kinds of stories that I'm interested in telling, and doing it in a way that gives people permission to talk about things we oftentimes don't want to talk about. Thank you.